Welcome to Doctrine and Covenants, Lesson 42. We're going to do D&C 115 through 120, The Ancient of Days at Adam-Ondi-Ahman. I love that title.
Do you know what's fun, though, is that the at Adam-Ondi-Ahman is important because there are other stages in prophecy where he shows up. We'll kind of get into it a little today.
That's awesome. And I'm Farrell.
And I'm Rhonda Pickering.
And you can always find us at propheticappointments.com. And don't forget to come to our Day of Prophecy
On November the 8th.
on November 8th. That's less than a month away. We still have a few seats left. And also, remember, we have a Israel tour starting in December. You can find both those on our website. So now that there's a peace deal,
Super excited about that. The Pilgrim Road.
maybe would feel comfortable coming. The Pilgrim Road just opened with tons of things. That's from the Pool of Shalom up to Temple Mount. Beautiful things happening. So if you can, join us. We'd love to have you.
Watching prophecy unfold, right?
Absolutely. And with that,
Let's get
you
going.
go, girl.
All right. So one of the first things that we are going to just take a look at real quick, you can see that in 1837, there's only one section received right there in chronological order of contents that's in the front of your Doctrine and Covenants. And you can see that there's just a few that are received in 1838, but 5 of those are in July. And so they're not spread out that far. Again, it's just a marker that this is a time of persecution, a time of apostasy. We've got the apostasy in Kirtland with the fall of the Kirtland Bank. And we now have Joseph and the brethren moving out to far west, to Independence. They're going to take a hike up to Adam-Ondi-Ahman, and that's the material that we're going to be covering in these sections. They're actually also going to command some of the others back in Kirtland to get their stuff together and get out to Missouri. So we're going to see that in section 117.
I kind of think it was pretty bold. I mean, pretty strong language, when it said, don't get tied up in your property. Don't, I didn't think of the word.
Well, let it go.
Let it go. Let go of material possessions a little bit. I mean, how many of us are there, right?
Exactly. And, I mean, some of these guys, Newell K. Whitney and others are, stalwarts in church history. So, it's not that their heart was necessarily in the wrong place. It was just that they needed
their practical mind is like,
yeah,
let's liquidate this or something.
Temporal concerns aren't as much as, and don't put as much stock in it as you're doing right now. So we'll get to that when we get to D&C 117. We're going all the way from 115 to 120. So we gotta hit the road and make hay while the sun shines. D&C 115 is about the name of the church, and those of you that have done your church history on this, you know that at the beginning they called it the Church of Christ, and that name was too common, so they changed it to the Church of Latter-day Saints. And then finally you're going to have this pushback that, wait a minute, the Book of Mormon says that Christ Church is called after his name, and so they're going to get all of this process of growth solidified here in D&C 115 with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I think sometimes we don't realize that sometimes you have to ask the question before you get the answer. And sometimes you have to work at the answer a little bit. So They didn't know right out of the gate what the church should be named until the questions came up enough that they asked. I mean, they just kind of went off of what the Book of Mormon says. It needs to be
exactly
the Church of Christ, yeah.
Right. And you can see right here, because of the way I've divided this slide, verses 1 and 4 and verses 18 and 19.
Must be a chiasm.
That this is a chiasm, the whole section is. So let's keep exploring and find what the center of this is. And, of course, we're not mentioning a lot about President Nelson's request that we put, actually, he said in his talk, it's not a request, it's a command in the scriptures that we call our church after Jesus Christ. And so
Yeah.
it's been a little bit difficult to go from the nickname to the long full
Well,
name,
and
but
sometimes for description to the broader audience, perhaps you might still use the Mormon, but still, it's absolutely, we're
but
the
we're
Church of Christ,
exactly, we're
of
not the
Jesus
Church of
Christ.
Mormon, we're the Church of
Yeah,
Jesus
exactly.
Christ of
Not the
Latter-day
Church of
Saints.
Paul, not the Church of, right?
So I love this section here for that reason. All right, as we're moving towards the center, they're being encouraged to gather to the city of Far West here. And that I love that this city is to be a holy and a consecrated land. And even though the saints are time in Far West is very short-lived, they hardly have time to fill the commandment and lay the cornerstones of the temple here before we're going to hit the Missouri persecutions, which we will be dealing with in spades in the next lesson. Gosh, when we were there in what, 2017
For
for
the
the
eclipse.
eclipse, and there at Far West, we watched the sun set in 360 degrees. That was,
Actually, it was quite a miracle day.
yes, it was.
Yeah, definitely a miracle day.
We had a huge cloud cover.
Oh, well, socked in.
It just socked in. The weather was socked in. The ground was soaked, and there's way too much to tell about this
Yeah.
trip. But it, we had a promise that we'd see it right at the moment of the complete eclipse. The clouds
Just as it
parted.
got right there to the close, the clouds parted away. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a lot of people
And
on
then
the
we were
trip
able
with
to
us.
just see it.
A lot of people on the trip with us that seriously did not think that our prayers would be answered, but they certainly were. It was a testimony to me that the Lord wants us to pay attention to the signs and the times in the last days. He's telling them to arise and shine forth, that they may be a light and a standard for the nations. And of course, the nations in Hebrew is the Gentiles. And this is the time that we're in where God's people need to stand. They need to be a light. And they needed to gather at this time to Far West. And it was to be a defense and a refuge from the storm and from the wrath, which will be poured out without mixture upon the whole earth. So in Isaiah, what is the storm and the wrath?
Well, the wrath is it's twofold. I mean, the wrath is
Full answer.
an individual
Yeah.
and a time.
Yes, it is. And throughout the Old Testament and the Hebrew feasts of the Lord, you'll see that the storm imagery is this period of tribulation, this, like you said, the time period of the wrath, and it is caused by a person, the king of Assyria in the book of Isaiah, the king of the north
Yeah.
in the book of Daniel.
And I would argue that, because sometimes we like to use the word antichrist.
In the New Testament,
But I would argue that there are many antichrists, and you
Yes.
you should not focus in too much on the idea that there's this one antichrist. Yes, there is definitely
Well,
a last day bad guy.
I like your point there. The thing to remember is that, just as Zion is not one person, even though it's led by a prophet, right? The end time, the evil is one person as a leader, but there's a whole alliance of nations
Sure.
with him, of course. But here again, it's just another reference. You'll see this all throughout the Doctrine and Covenants, that Joseph Smith's mission in bringing in the fullness of the Gentiles was to prepare for this point when the wrath would be unleashed, when the cup of iniquity would be full. And, quite honestly, I think that a lot of the early apostles, the 12 apostles thought, it was going to be in their lifetime or certainly in the next generation, right?
For sure.
And quite honestly, I think that even the 12 apostles at the time of Christ thought that they would just hustle out there, convert a few Gentiles, and then he would restore the kingdom to Israel. It's, again, important to know the times and seasons in the scriptures. All right, and this is where we are commanded. You can see that we're still coming into E and F, and because there's a dot in the middle, you can see that we're jumping from verses 14, 15, and 16. So we're not to the center yet, is the point, if you watch the numbers. And F is kind of interesting because in element F, you have an antithetical. A lot of times when you're doing parallelisms in Hebrew, the beginning and the finishing are the opposite. So you can have in a parallelism and a chiasm, you can have synonymous parallels, you can have antithetical parallels, the opposite. Well, you can see that the opposite in element E prime there in the bottom as well. It says, if my people build it not the temple according to the pattern, I will not accept it. But if my people do build it, then I will accept it. So you often have this contrast that is a point of emphasis here, that the house needs to be built according to the pattern. And that, that's Old Testament language as well. When King David gave the pattern of the temple to King Solomon, again, it's built according to a pattern that's revealed in heaven, just as Joseph Smith and Frederick G. Williams were actually given a virtual tour in vision of the Kirtland Temple before it was built as well. So he's commanded them to build a temple at Far West, and that he wanted them to finish it. So when I see things like this, there's the argument that when I give a command and enemies prohibit you from doing that, then I no longer require it at your hands, that we see with the early saints. But I don't necessarily think that means the prophecy won't be fulfilled.
Sure. I think we will yet see a temple at Far West.
Absolutely. And so in section 115, they're told that they're actually to lay the cornerstones on the 4th of July next. And there is your southeast cornerstone, which is the first one at the point of light that they lay. And when laying the cornerstones of the temple, it represented the first presidency, the Melchizedek priesthood, and it was laid by the apostles Joseph Smith Jr. and the first presidency are going to lay that cornerstone on July the 4th. And then they're going to go around and lay the other 3 cornerstones with the leader plus the members of the organization that they're the leader of. So you had John Corll with the High Council, Elias Higby next with the Aaronic and the bishopric, and then finally John Murdoch was head of the priests quorum at the time, and they laid that last one. And all this was done on the 4th of July next. So you can see that the center of this chiasm, and this is crazy. Okay, this is crazy. We're talking about building a temple. We're talking about building according to the pattern of God, which includes the laying of the cornerstones here. But in all of this instruction to build a temple, why in the world would the center or the main point of the chiastic structure of section 115 be that they were to recommence laying the foundation 1 year from this day? So what's the date? I highlighted it on the
July
slide.
4th, right?
Well, July 4th is when they begin, but 1 year from the date of when they receive the revelation. And that's why I put the heading at the top.
So it's the April 26th.
Right. So 1 year from April 26, 1838 means that on April 26, 1839, they are to recommence laying the foundation at Far West. Now, I think it's absolutely fascinating when the Lord sets up a specific date for a specific prophecy or a specific event, because in some ways I think it changes the dynamic.
Oh, it absolutely did. And then, leading into where I think you're going. Anyway, yeah, I remember the story that they ended up having to come right after the stroke of midnight. Of course, they're working Gregorian, and they had to come right after the stroke of midnight so that they fulfilled the prophecy and lay the cornerstone, which is an interesting fulfillment, and yet it's just one of those situations.
And notice the terminology there. It says that they're going to recommence laying the foundation. So the cornerstones are laid on July the 4th, but on the night of April the 26th, 1839, the apostles are going to actually gather and roll another stone to the southeast corner to recommence the foundation of that temple. And we've had a lot of fun with this one. I remember one time when we went out to Far West with a large group of youth and everything. They wanted to, so I said, okay, you get yourself out of bed at midnight and we're going to Far West. And we went to Far West at midnight and sat around and hot chocolate and told the stories of the apostles getting together, because of course, little unbeknownst to them in 1838, by 1839, there will be an extermination order issued. The Mormons will be killed on sight. And specifically, Samuel Bogart will issue a threat that if any of the apostles show up to try and fulfill that revelation, they will be murdered.
Fascinating that happened in America. Just a random, it's like almost what they did to the Indians. They're fair game.
Yeah. Yeah. And
like shooting rodents,
well, it's almost human nature in the mortal earthly kingdom world of power and political control. And so there's so many politics involved in the Mormon persecutions as well as Joseph Smith's assassination. And that's for another day. But the beautiful thing here, and this is my take, but I actually believe that when the Lord pinpoints a day, he's setting up a test.
Yeah.
I really do, because
Samuel Lamanite situation.
We're about to see that they are going to be commanded to leave on this day from the site, a year from when the revelation is given, which is April 26th. And the Lord knows that there's going to be serious opposition at this time. And the same thing happened in the Book of Mormon with Samuel the Lamanite. Samuel said, 5 years from this day, there will be a sign, there'll be a night with no darkness. And what was happening on the night before that day? You've
persecution,
got the opposition mounted. They're going to execute anyone. If the prophecy doesn't come true, they're going to execute the people. Here we are not going to let you fulfill this prophecy. We're going to prove Joseph Smith as a false prophet, and we will kill you on sight. So, of course, we know the story. They gathered together right after midnight on April 25th. And of course, you've got the situation where Russell and Turley, he knocks on the door and tells Isaac Russell goodbye. And he says, "What in the world are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, me and the 12 are just heading out of town." So they left their footprints so that the mobs would know that the revelation was fulfilled and that God is in charge. And I think that all of this was to give them the faith necessary to cross the ocean and to have one of the most successful missions that we've ever had in the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The numbers in England would triple the numbers in America. And there are so many stories. We could spend the whole time talking about the mission across the ocean of the 12 apostles at this time. It's very interesting that in this revelation, and we'll come back to this story in just a minute when we talk about a few of the apostles that have apostatized and those that will be replaced. That moves us into the next revelation, which is actually part of the history of the church, part of Joseph Smith's journal account of as he came out to Missouri and they're exploring, they're finding places of settlement. They go up the river to White's Ferry. Along the way, he describes the potential of the scene and the land, and then they get to the place called Spring Hill on May the 19th, 1838. And we have in his description of the land, Brigham Young is going to later have Orson Pratt add in 1876, I believe, this revelation, this part of Joseph Smith's account that was the word of the Lord. Brigham Young is going to add a lot of revelations that were not in the earlier editions of the Doctrine and Covenants at that time, and this is one of them. Spring Hill is named by the Lord Adam-Ondi-Ahman because, said he, it is the place where Adam shall come to visit his people, or the Ancient of Days shall sit, as spoken by Daniel the prophet. So now know
those Daniel the prophet.
Yeah, you know where we're going to be going with this, with Daniel's numbers and everything. One big point to make right here is that this one tiny little verse is huge as far as a separation between the normal Christian interpretation of the book of Daniel and who the Ancient of Days is, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the restoration through the prophet Joseph Smith, what we have revealed. And of course, that's going to be that the Ancient of Days is Adam. Okay. And it says that this is what was spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And he actually speaks of the Ancient of Days twice in Daniel chapter 7. Once at the beginning and once at the end. What does that tell you?
There's something in the middle.
That the entire chapter 7 of the book of Daniel is chiastic in theme. All right. And we have the judgment sitting in the early verses, and we have the judgment sitting in the last verses. So I want to take a look at the last verses first because they give us a time marker. Okay. And there's actually a time marker in the first ones too, but it's a little more cryptic. You got to do a little more homework to pull that one. All right. So this one, and it says that I beheld that the same little horn, and this is going to be your wrath in the book of Isaiah, the king of Assyria. This is the king of the north. He's one of your end time evil players. This little horn that has a mouth that speaks blasphemy against God. And in Daniel 7, we're told that that little horn will prevail against the saints for a time. And of course, this is going to be part of the trials of the end time, part of what we're talking about here and telling them that they have to leave from that site a year from the date of the revelation. And the enemies have as much access to the revelation as the saints do, especially because a lot of the enemies are apostates anyway.
Right.
Here again, we're setting up. I think that the prophecies of the end time are setting the stage for what? The glory and the apostasy that is going to occur. And I hope we're on that glory side, that faithful to the end, that Newell K. Whitney side, that, oh boy, I shouldn't start naming because there's a lot of heroes from our Mormon, from this time period in Mormon history as we move into the persecutions in Missouri and the exile of the saints to Nauvoo. All right, I beheld that the little horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came. That is a huge time marker.
So much. You all of a sudden, when you realize the Ancient of Days is
Adam, and that
Michael, and all of a sudden you can connect it to chapter 12.
They actually are in the next slide. So let's do it. Let's pull these time markers together in Daniel 7 and learn a little bit about Adam-Ondi-Ahman while we're doing it, okay? Because it's taken from Daniel chapter 7, which is tied to Daniel chapter 12. Like Farrell well knows, until the Ancient of Days comes. So this tells you that there is going to be a persecution of the saints before Adam comes.
Yes, and it gives you the time frame, which is equivalent to the time frame after.
Yes, and so okay, so we have to do some math here, right? It says that in the parallel verses here, it says in verse 25, and they shall be given into his hand until a times and the dividing of the time. So for 3.5 years, they are going to be prevailed against by the persecution and the opposition. So this 3.5 years, I think that in order to understand it, you have to understand something about the hour of judgment. So you go ahead and take it because I know that I can see it in your eyes.
Well, I was just going to say, let's first define times, and the dividing of time. Right. Many of you already know, but time is an equivalent to a block of in Hebrew, most of the time it's used for the cycle of a year. A moed cycle. One cycle of the feast. So time is one cycle, which is 1 year. Times is 2 more. And the dividing of time is a half. And we know that too because of connections, parallels to the 1260 days all these other connections. We know that this is a 3.5 year period.
But it's also important to note that 3.5 is half of
7,
which is
tribulation,
the end time, which is hour of judgment.
And why do we know that? In essence, is because really you got to kind of connect a lot of dots to be sure of it. But the way we know mostly is Daniel 9:27, when it says that they will make this covenant for one Shavuah, with 1 7 of years in this instance.
And then in 2 Esdras 7, he straight out says that in the end time, it's a week
of years.
Right?
So this 7-year period, most of you Christians buy into that. Mormons, members of the church, often don't pay much attention to it, but it's a very strong Christian idea.
Right, and it can be because there's so much hoopla about it.
Sure.
That you're like, where do we sort the prophecy from the disinformation?
Yeah, from the tradition. And, I think in general, our Christian friends have wanted to take Thessalonians and some of the scriptures and make it before all of this time. But it's actually really clear when you tie in Daniel 12 that the part that you're escaping with what they refer to as the rapture is really only the last 3.5.
Right. And we're going to kind of hit this as we go on, make this a little bit more clear for those of you that aren't following what we're talking about here. But basically understand that the 7 years is divided in half. There's the first 3.5 years, and then there's the second 3.5 years.
This was referring to the first.
This is the 3.5 years until Michael stands, until the Ancient of Days, or Adam, comes at Adam-Ondi-Ahman. And it's made very clear here in Daniel 7, verse 22. And that is why I started there in 21.
Yeah, and
now we can look at the matching verses at the top.
So in essence, what we're saying here is we didn't make this time markers up. The scripture's given it to us very directly in Daniel. And it's because it doesn't flow right from 7 to 12, we miss it.
Right.
But it's really Michael standing. In both cases, when you understand the Ancient of Days, is Michael.
And one of the reasons we miss it is the same reason we miss a lot of the points in Isaiah, is we're not breaking it into the literary structure to see which points are parallel. We'll touch on that a tiny bit, but not too much today, because we have a lot of other rabbits to chase. So here is D&C 27. We learned that Michael is Adam. He is the father of all. He is the prince. He's often called the prince. There's a bad prince, by the way. That's your wrath. That's your king of the north. That's your bad guy. But there is the prince. That's Michael as well. And then the Ancient of Days, as we see here in Daniel 7. And then we also see it in D&C 107, where we have that very first Adam-Ondi-Ahman council meeting with Adam and his descendants. It's the priesthood posterity and their families as they meet in the valley for the blessing before Adam dies. And they bless Adam, and they called him Michael, the prince, the archangel. And that's one of my favorite titles of Michael, is the archangel. And they are given into the hands of this persecution for the times, and half a time. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the mention of the Ancient of Days in the front half of Daniel 7. Okay, again, it's in parallel with those verses 21 and 22 in the bottom. And it says, and the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit. Now, it gives this magnificent description of Michael when he is exalted, with his garment white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool, and his throne like a fiery flame, and his wheels as a burning fire. And I love the wheels concept, because if you study Elijah, thank you. Elijah's chariot. This is a translation, a dimensional. When you see those fiery wheels within wheels in Ezekiel and in Elijah's translation, you see this has dimensional connotation there. And a fiery stream issued and came from him. I love that. That's actually the constellation Eridanus. We're going to do biblical astronomy someday, but that's the fiery stream that comes forth from him at the foot of Orion. And then we have thousands and thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000s times 10,000s stood before him. And that is going to become like a flag for Michael, right?
You can always attach it.
Yeah.
Book of Revelation.
We can't chase that rabbit today, but we will say this: the judgment was set and the books were opened. John, in Revelation chapter 20, is going to quote Daniel there. And it's very clear to see that the judgment was set and the books were opened. The verse right before that is the great white throne judgment. So this glorified state here, and the judgment set and the books being opened, is at the end of the millennium, where Satan has been bound for 1,000 years. And now we're at that second death judgment. And when all men, this is kind of a wordling that you can use to know that it's the resurrection. At the end of the millennium is that every man will come and stand before the throne. And you kind of see that right there. It says, and the judgment was set and the books were open here. And in the center of this little chiasm here, it talks about that I beheld that the beast was slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. That's the second death. And as concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, and yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of
there at the end of the
so basically what we're talking about in this instance, when it says the rest of the beasts, this would be the rest of the kingdoms of the world in this context,
right?
Which probably is going to entail the heathen nations to a large degree, because
well, this is the judgment at the end of the millennium.
That's why I say, I don't know.
That's why I say it gets very interesting to start to play with that there. But then
that's why I say, I guess you're causing me to contemplate, because I always kind of read this as at the beginning.
Well, the reason you know that it's the judgment was set and the books were open is two reasons. Number one, directly quoted in Revelation 20 at the end of the millennium, at that resurrection there, the call.
Cyclical fulfillment, perhaps.
Yes. And then also it's quoted in D&C 128 when it's talking about the dead being released from prison. It's the books being open.
So maybe it's a dual fulfillment, one at the terrestrial judgment and one at the celestial judgment.
Yeah, yes. So, and that's kind of what I'm trying to point out here is, don't just take every verse about the Ancient of Days and slap it at Adam-Ondi-Ahman, because this one is at the end of the millennium. Well, maybe it's still at Adam-Ondi-Ahman, I don't know.
I lean towards it kind of is. I've always interpreted it that it's Adam-Ondi-Ahman there too, but perhaps it's absolutely cyclical in the fact that it has a cyclical fulfillment.
Right. As the missionary work expands and at the morning of the first resurrection, the celestial come forth, at the beginning of millennium, the terrestrial come forth, and at the end of the millennium, the telestial, which is the bulk of mankind that have been part of this earth's temporal existence, are going to be resurrected at that time. It's an expanding mission and an expanding field of salvation and glory. And this is going to be an incredible time. I just want everyone to see the stages here. Now, when you get to verses 13 and 14, for most scholars, this is the center of Daniel chapter 7. And this is when I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days. Now, teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith is going to be very, very clearly identify what's going on here. But you also need to cross-reference to Matthew 26, because in Matthew 26, Jesus is on trial, and he is being commanded by the Sanhedrin to identify himself and
cross-examined.
Yeah, whether he's the Son of God or not. And he's going to quote Daniel 7. And remember, first he says, "Thou hast said," and that really makes him mad. But then he quotes Daniel 7 and it says, "Behold, you will see that the Son of Man will come in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." And that's when they say, "Oh, blasphemy," and everything. And you have to realize that wouldn't be blasphemy if he wasn't claiming to be that.
Well, it wasn't blasphemy. They thought it was, because he was saying who he really was.
Exactly. And if you don't believe that's who he is, then he must be blasphemous, right? Absolutely. Joseph Smith is going to talk about this, and that Adam will turn the keys to Christ, and then that Adam will be given dominion during the millennial time period. So he is the head of the dispensation of the fullness of times. Joseph Smith laid the foundation for it, but it is the millennial day when we see these prophecies come to their fulfillment. And his dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not be done away. And the kingdom that's established at Adam-Ondi-Ahman is the kingdom that will not be destroyed. And Joseph Smith again laid the foundation, established the Council of 50, the kingdom of God. But they won't become empowered until this meeting.
I would argue, now that I give it some thought, that any telestial kingdom is going to be destroyed. So in essence, when it becomes a kingdom that will never be destroyed, It's at bare minimum terrestrial,
right,
and probable celestial, because that's the only kingdom in the long haul that will never be destroyed.
right. I think, well, whoa, that opens up a can of worms. But I think sometimes the kids get a little confused between the telestial mortal temporal existence and the telestial glory kingdom that is inherited after much repentance and weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth for thousands
Right.
of years. And so
So
I
those
just got
lines might be a little
confused.
confusing for
Yeah, yeah. But ultimately, the the kingdoms of God are eternal. But we could have a big conversation of how eternal different parts of it are, right?
my argument would be eternal may be that the conditions they exist in are internal, but not necessarily the kingdom itself.
Exactly.
No, the individual.
But we are
pieces.
splitting hairs here.
Yeah, well,
Straighting over that. So let's go back to Daniel. And now let's jump right where you wanted to jump. And I'm going to just let you take it from here because I know that this is actually something that you discovered that well, of course, you know that the chapter breaks in the scriptures were not in the original text.
Yeah, they're not in the text.
And so we believe that you should really read Daniel, the last verses of Daniel 11 and the first verses of Daniel 12
without a break of thought.
Without break. And it was Farrell that discovered this. So I'm going to let him take it.
Yeah. So
because this is going to give us a time frame for when Michael stands up.
So back in the context of chapter 7, it says times a half, and then Michael delivers the saints. Well, now look at it in chapter.
When he does stand,
when this time when the saints are delivered, let's read it, because we're at the end of chapter 11.
Well, and what is the bad guy doing here at the end of chapter 11 too? Yeah.
Yeah. So it goes into in verse 1, and he, the king, and I'm going to put in the context so you know it, the king of the north, at the time of the end, so it even defines when this takes place, shall enter into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. So where's the glorious land? Well, many could argue there's two glorious lands.
I should have made it blue.
And
because he's definitely talking about Israel right there.
Anyway, so this glorious land we're referring to between the seas is pretty obvious. It's between the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, and the Mediterranean. So between the seas is very much Mount Moriah.
In Jerusalem.
And of course, we have in the woman at the well, he actually claims salvation comes of the Jews. And what he means by that is he comes through the Jews. His name is salvation. And so he's saying, I am coming through the Jews. So sometimes we need...
There's another verse here that we're about to pop in here from 2 Thessalonians that will clarify that this is Jerusalem.
So, yeah. Anyway, so just so you get that straight. And he stretched forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So this whole, of course, she's tying in Isaiah's description.
Isaiah in Ether 13 that says, just as Joseph of Egypt was taken into Egypt, Lehi was taken into America. So guess where the house of Joseph went?
And I would...
Latter-day Egypt.
I would argue it's both. It's the old Egypt and symbolic Egypt, which is the Americas, because that's the land where our lineage was taken
captive. The house of Joseph through Lehi.
Yeah, exactly. And he, this king of the north, Antichrist character, shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas on the glorious holy mountain. I mean, that's pretty well a description. The glorious holy mountain is Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. So there's people that have argued that, it's Jackson County. Well, you have a hard time arguing there's a mountain in Jackson County even. But anyway, that means...
I do want to say that when the scriptures are very clear and they define that it's Jerusalem or Judea, like in Malachi, or even here.
It's kind of funny. We try to stretch it.
Yeah, Daniel chapters 11, Daniel's actually chapters 8 through 12 were written in Hebrew for the Jewish people. Gabriel tells them this is for your people. We need to not try and use replacement theology.
Exactly, and that's what I was trying to zero in on him. Maybe I'm taking too long. And at that time, Michael shall stand. So it's compared verse 45 to Thessalonians, and whosoever and exalteth himself above that which is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So this person is representing himself as...
This is a hijack of a temple that is standing and built in Jerusalem when he does this double cross thing.
Absolutely. And at that time, Michael stands. And we have to be very appreciative of the prophet Joseph Smith telling us who Michael is.
Oh,
Because you wouldn't be able to connect.
at all.
You couldn't connect these dots without that information. Ancient of Days,
Yeah.
Michael.
If you do the early church history, you're like, oh, W.W. Phelps had this fascination with Adam-Ondi-Ahman, and he wrote these songs, and it's fascinating in church history that they're talking about Adam-Ondi-Ahman before they even know where it is, and all of that's neither here nor there. This is being revealed to them, and these scriptures are unlocking prophecy.
Absolutely. And most people don't connect the dots because they don't connect that Michael is the Ancient of Days. It's kind of, if A equals C and C equal B, then A equal B. Okay.
I would have said that a little differently.
I know. I deliberately twisted it up so you'd have to think about it. I was trying to show you that they're equal.
Geometry theorems, it went A equals B and B equals C and then A equals C. But
okay. I did it differently just so that you have to challenge your brain. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have. But anyway, so that's the time of trouble, and then them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. And you can wrap that into D&C 88. You can wrap that into Thessalonians. You can wrap that into so many places to realize that right there in the center, like it says in Daniel 9, verse 27, is this separation of the numbers.
And we saw in chapter 7 that the saints were being persecuted until Michael stood. And now in verse 2, it says that many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. It's a resurrection.
And to everlasting life.
It is when Zion is empowered.
Absolutely. And when you see this, it's like somebody said, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
This is a given. It's the grand reversal of events.
And when you're randomly connecting these verses, they all interlink. And once you start to see the interlinking, then you start to see it everywhere.
You can't unsee it. And I love that comment. It was actually a friend that went with us up to Glen Beck who says, once you see it, you can't hardly unsee it.
Exactly. But in verse 6, we get to a key thing. We're talking about, so we know it's 7 years. We know it's a time and a half times and a time and a half.
Chapter 7, we got times and a half.
Right.
And chapter 12, we got times and a half.
Go ahead and read verses 6 and 7.
How long shall it be to end of these wonders? So now we've had the middle point.
Michael stands.
And we know that happened 3.5 years from when the little horn will persecute for 3.5 years. Coming to it, now we have going from it is times and half a time. And there's your 7 years. It's just linking very simply, really, once you put it together. But sometimes simple doesn't come together until it does. Does that make sense? I mean, I must have read these chapters hundreds of times. And then all of a sudden it just went click,
Exactly. It's right there in black and white.
Yeah, it was pretty obvious once you see it.
I actually planned that you would jump right in.
Well, I kind of did what you did, I guess.
You're like,
my Daniel. Give me my Daniel.
All right, so let's put all these pieces together. All right, Joseph Smith is going to say, Daniel in his 7th chapter speaks of the Ancient of Days, and he means the oldest man, our father, Adam Michael. We don't even have to do any connecting here. Joseph's going to just say it right out. He will call his children together and hold a council with them to prepare them for the coming of the Son of Man. Why are we having Adam-Ondi-Ahman?
To prepare for the millennial return of Christ. And I'm not going to say the millennial day because I kind of lean towards Adam-Ondi-Ahman is the beginning of the millennium. But for Christ's coming, they're preparing.
Yes.
For it.
And this is a cataclysmic event.
Absolutely.
The people have got to be rescued at this point before he arrives. Okay? Adam, is the father of the human family, and he presides over the spirits of men. Now, I made this kind of match your Adam-Ondi-Ahman color here because all that have had the keys must stand before him in this grand council. And so I've heard so much speculation about, when does the city of Enoch return? And I'm like,
kind of seems right
to attend.
If it's not if we don't see it in this dimension, I think it's going to be here one way or t'other.
Exactly.
Now,
right?
how we see it is up in the air.
Have we learned this in spades that, prophecy doesn't come down exactly like you thought it was. It comes down. You put your glasses on, you watch, and you look, and you see how.
Then you see the details.
You see God's majesty, but it's not always exactly like we think it will be. Just like I don't think that in D&C 115, they knew how that revelation would end up having to get fulfilled in 1839 after there was
a year later.
After there was a
They didn't know that they'd end up coming right after midnight to fulfill the prophecy.
Exactly.
And that's important. I was going to say, well, that's the key to understanding what's happening now. That it's not exactly always a perfect pre-think of what it's going to be.
Exactly.
But we see it in hindsight and we fill in the details more correctly.
I absolutely loved when Rabbi Kempinski told us in the bookstore Shorshim in Jerusalem. When I asked him, I said, well, how do the Jews look at Daniel as far as prophecy? And he said, prophecy is best viewed in the rear view mirror. And it's like becoming one of my favorite things because, we just have to know what the prophecies are and then
understand the framework and then start to fill in the dots.
Right. And watch the majesty of God unfold, right? Okay, so now here Joseph is going to give us some super good keys that clarify the pronouns in Daniel chapter 7. Who's standing before who and what, Well, Joseph makes it clear. The Son of Man stands before him, Adam, and there gives him glory and dominion. And Adam delivers up his stewardship to Christ, that which was delivered to him as holding the keys of the universe. But Adam retains his standing as head of the human family. And so
he's still the patriarch.
Again, this is such a beautiful interplay of men whose priesthood is to serve, not for
dancing with each other,
stars on their shoulders. They are working together in concert, right? This is another quote just over a year later from Joseph Smith. This then is the nature of the priesthood. Every man holding the presidency of his dispensation, and one man holding the presidency of them all, even Adam. And Adam receiving his presidency and authority from the Lord, but cannot receive, and this is so important because this ties right back into those verses that we said were time markers for the end of the millennium. It says, but he cannot receive a fullness until Christ shall present the kingdom to the Father, which is when they have saved them all. None have been lost. The telestial have been resurrected at that time, which shall be at the end of the last dispensation. There's so many beautiful keys coming down here. And then just to remember here that, again, as I said, Enoch has to show up to this meeting, I believe, and it's because of this promise in Moses 7. And the Lord said unto Enoch, as I live, I can't get a stronger promise.
I am that I am.
As God lives, even so will I come in the last days. In the days of wickedness and vengeance, this period of wrath and everything that the restoration of the gospel is trying to prepare us for, right? This period, to fulfill the oath which I have made unto you concerning the children of Noah. And the day shall come that the earth will rest. But before that day, the heavens will be darkened, and a veil of darkness will cover the earth, and the heavens will shake, and also the earth, and the great tribulations shall be among the children of men. This is what all the kids are all scared about, and the adults. Okay? The end time prophecy, the wrath, the great tribulation. Well, guess what? Read verse 62. But my people will I preserve, and righteousness will I send down out of heaven. Here we go. Michael standing at Adam-Ondi-Ahman, attending the meeting. And truth will I send forth out of earth to bear that's the 144,000, and bear testimony of mine only begotten, his resurrection from the dead. Yea, and also the resurrection of all men. And I love that line there, because what just happened at Adam-Ondi-Ahman, according to
resurrection.
A resurrection, right?
Yeah.
And righteousness and truth will I cause to sweep the earth as with a flood. And that's a dang good thing, because the scriptures describe that bad guy as a flood, overflowing his borders and attacking the nations, to gather out mine elect from the four quarters of the earth. Did you want to say something?
When you start to see all this, you realize there's so many scriptures that tie together. You got Daniel, you got Jeremiah, you got all of these other touching places. Ezekiel's all about this time frame.
Well, chapters 40 through 48 are all the building plans, the pattern for the temple in Jerusalem.
Well, and it's actually the whole layout of the progression of time. Actually, in Ezekiel, you say it's the temple plans, but it's really more the whole progression from the sacrifice of the red heifer is all of it, building right through.
Laid out.
And
straight from Ezekiel 36, 37,
yeah,
38.
and it just lays right through. It starts back in 36, 35 actually, 35 and 36. You start to see all these scriptures are telling the same story.
Yeah.
You needed keys to connect the dots, and now the dots are starting to connect. It's beautiful.
The restoration of the prophet Joseph Smith. All
Yes.
this information about Adam and Michael and Adam-Ondi-Ahman in the Ancient of Days, to gather out mine elect from the four quarters of the earth into a place which I will prepare, a holy city. For there will be my tabernacle, and they will be looking forth for the time of my coming, and it will be called Zion, the New Jerusalem. This is the plan, that when things get dark with great tribulations and people choose the arm of flesh rather than, and the treaties of man rather than trust in the salvation of God, that is when Zion rises, when Michael stands, and when darkness also stands. It says in Daniel 11 that at this time a vile person stands up, and he says, I am God. And Michael says,
no, you're not.
No. All right, so we saw in what we see in Daniel chapter 8, one of the only markers that we've passed so far in the Daniel's visions and his end time prophecies, this period of this countdown to the Ancient of Days. And again, that's why we talked about it in D&C 115. What happens when God actually gives you a numerical countdown to a prophecy?
Expect a test.
Expect opposition to rise.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think, I think, I remember when once you said, but wait, Lord, if I show people what Daniel's numbers say, won't it change the prophecy?
Won't it change history?
Yeah.
Or the future?
Or how people act.
Yes, absolutely.
And your answer?
Well, I can only give the answer that the Spirit gave me. Exactly.
It's part of the plan.
It's part of the plan. It's part of the plan that Samuel stood on the wall and said 5 years. It's part of the plan that Joseph Smith says, dedicate Far West or start to do the rebuild, recommence 1 year from today. That was part of the plan, and the opposition actually knew the plan too. And they mounted a plan, and God foiled it.
Maybe
that's
it's to show he's God.
Yeah. Seems like so in the case of Samuel and the
you can try to
day and the
stop.
night and the day.
Yeah, I can make the prophecy. You can try to stop the prophecy, and I'll fulfill it anyway.
Exactly.
That kind of thing. I don't know, but it's glorious to me. So in Daniel chapter 8, then I heard one saint speaking and saying to another saint, how long will be the vision? This is just one of the examples where we learned to maybe not guess and wait for the review.
Yeah, right.
Because we thought that the vision would be with the daily
sacrifice. Next point.
That leads up to the abomination of desolation, the transgression of desolation here. But the vision starts with something entirely different than the daily sacrifice.
It actually blew our mind.
When we actually saw it, we were like,
is this it?
Yeah, we didn't even recognize it at first, but now it's becoming more and more clear as to
more and more obvious.
We'll talk about it in just a second. And then he says that the time of the vision of all of this double cross and the time period when they will be able to do the daily sacrifice is going to be 2,300 days. And that we learn in verse 17, it's at the time of the end that they'll understand this and they'll see that this vision will happen.
I have to tell a little story on myself, because there was a stupor of thought, I'll call it. I had a stupor of thought when I laid out this interpretation of Daniel, because it seemed
when you saw how the numbers worked.
Yes. And it seemed almost like the daily sacrifice had two start points.
Right. 300 vision
and the 1290.
1290 days, it says that they'll do the sacrifice and then it will stop.
Yeah. So in essence, I was always a little perplexed. Well, why does it seem like there's two?
Right.
But I didn't know the answer.
It's because the vision doesn't start with the sacrifice.
Absolutely.
It ends with the stopping of the sacrifice.
Exactly.
But it doesn't start with it. So let's just take a review for those who haven't followed and don't know what we figured out when we were there.
But that being said, to even keep up with this, I recommend you get the book and read it.
Yeah.
Our Daniel's book.
Yeah, we go through this step by step, but also our video at the time appointed. We actually play all these on this chart that you see, the hour of judgment that you probably recognize from our work. In yellow and red, those are all the markers, the Daniel's numbers, we call them, the numbers that Gabriel gave to him in the scriptures. And the video at the time appointed will actually walk you through the math of how each of these numbers count to and from Adam-Ondi-Ahman. Okay, this time when Michael stands in Daniel 12 that we're reading about, and that Joseph is revealing the place of here in D&C 116.
Now, I do want to make something totally clear here, and that is this. We have done extensive research and extensive study, and not just Daniel's numbers, but also a study I did in since Adam, the whole time frame.
The generation since
Adam.
6,000 years of the earth.
The 6,000 years is spoken of in D&C 77. We've done a lot of tying this all together. And it seems incredibly bulletproof. But that being said, we're still human.
And the gospel's still true, even if we didn't figure out Daniel's numbers.
We're still, so don't think for a second that this is any touting on our side. This is simply sharing with you the beauty of what we have discovered.
Right. And again, if you want to understand that, the easiest way to, know that we're coming up to this time period, this end period that Joseph Smith kept saying they were getting ready for, is just to do the 2 days. We know that Jesus was crucified in 33 AD. That can be proven astronomically. And 2000 plus 33 is the 2 days in Hosea chapter 6. And it's the 2 days of the nations.
And then you have these keywords, after 2 days.
Yep, just right after 2 days. All of these things come together in beautiful harmony. And I keep finding passages in Isaiah and all over the scriptures that just reinforce it and reinforce it.
And what we're trying to share with you is we absolutely feel this is solid. Do we feel like the details inside of it are perfect? No.
Or that we have any more insight than you? No. Okay. But there's just some math involved here that is pretty dang tight. Okay, so we were there at the Feast of Dedication, or the first day of Hanukkah, on December the 26th, 2024, because we knew that this was a marker and it had to be important. And we went to Temple Mount on December the 26th, and Farrell and I were just like, well, they're certainly not going to do an offering today. I heard that some woman carried a lamb in her cloak, but that doesn't count either. So we were wondering, Heavenly Father, what is this beginning of the vision? And there we were, and all we saw was this dude, this minister of security for Israel, who came on Temple Mount and dared to pray
and announce it.
The troops that were in Israel, and then to tweet about it and announce it. And he was not arrested, which was out of the norm. Which is a breaking of this. They call it the status quo.
The status quo.
Right. Yep. The Jews were not allowed to pray on Temple Mount. And so he tweeted on December the 26th, I went up to our holy place this morning to pray for the safety of our soldiers. Remember that October the 7th, 2023, they were attacked by Hamas and they were at war. For the speedy return of all those kidnapped and for complete victory with God's help. Now, I want you to take note of what he prayed for. He prayed for the return of the hostages, and he prayed for complete victory, right? On December the 26th, 2024. Now, if that was all that happened on that day, I wouldn't say that was prophetic, but that's not all that happened. He started a movement. That night on the news, when they showed Ben-Gvir's tweet, they also placed the verse, Isaiah 56, verse 7, for my house shall be known as a house of prayer for all nations, not just Muslims, not just Christians, but Jews as well can pray on Temple Mount. And this verse itself is a chiasm. It begins in the beginning of the verse, I will bring to my holy mountain and gladden in my house of prayer. So the question is, How could praying on Temple Mount be the start of a vision about the daily offerings being accepted in Jerusalem? Well, you have to go to the center of the chiasm in verse 7. I will bring to my holy mountain and gladden in my house of prayer their offerings and sacrifices shall be accepted on my altar, for my house shall be known as a house of prayer for all nations. So this
is the buildup.
Was the surprise beginning of Daniel's vision. The vision didn't begin with the offerings. It began with prayer. And when you think about that, of course it did. You know, how could they do anything on Temple Mount without being able to pray?
Exactly.
Right? All right. So Isaiah 56 verses 1 through 5, the 5 verses before that verse about the house of prayer, is talking about all nations being able to gather to Jerusalem. Again, at the end of the time of the Gentiles, when you have the restoration of the house of Israel, it doesn't exclude the Gentiles. The whole reason for the fullness of the Gentiles and the restoration of the gospel through the prophet Joseph Smith is so that there would be a remnant among the Gentiles that are going to play a big part in this restoration. And I love that in the feast of the Lord, you have the Feast of Tabernacles, symbolizing the presence of God in the storm, this tribulation, this darkness. God is there. You're in your little sukkah out there in the storm. It's kind of flimsy. You can see stars through the roof and the wind is blowing, but God's presence is there in that place. That's the whole symbolism of the children of Israel when they left the exodus out of Egypt, and God was with them in the wilderness. And then they have their branches there, their branches that they gather together. But the most beautiful part of the lulav for me now, and yes, the branches are important. You got to gather that remnant of Israel back together. But I love that there's good fruit from the Gentiles that is brought together in one with that lulav, and that it symbols God's people, the saints of God, coming together again in the end time. And I love this promise to the sons of the stranger that it talks about in these verses. It says, even unto them will I give in mine house and within my walls a place and a name, think temple, better than of sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name, and they're not cut off. When the Gentiles, the wicked Gentiles, are numbered with Israel. And these verses are so beautiful. One more from Isaiah. We could do tons from Isaiah on this topic, but in that day, the sprig of Jesse, who stands for an ensign to the peoples, shall be sought by the nations, and his rest shall be glorious, and he will raise the ensign to the nations. I'm reading the parallel in verse 12. Obviously,
verse 11 is the center.
Verse 11 is going to be the center, right? And we got the ensign to the nations in verse 10 and the ensign to the nations in verse 12. And assemble the exiled of Israel. He will gather the scattered of Judah from the four directions of the earth. And this is all about this time period that begins at Adam-Ondi-Ahman and culminates after Jesus Christ defeats the enemies of the nations that are gathered at Armageddon at the Mount of Olives, because after that, the world is free to come to Jerusalem and to worship the King of Kings, Jesus Christ, the King of Zion. In that day, my Lord will again raise his hand and reclaim the remnant of his people and those that will be left out of Assyria. I love that there's many in Assyria. That's where the bad guy is named after, but there's good people there.
Yeah, obviously, many Jews went north.
Exactly. And not just Jews, but Jesus says in the end time, it is my sheep hear my voice. It doesn't matter what nation you're from. And that's what this is saying. It doesn't matter if you hear his voice and you come.
And if you get to the terminology of what actually Israel means in the pictorial Hebrew, it is
the sons.
Covenant.
It's covenant sons.
It's who's become under covenant with him. Yes. Is technically the definition. Originally, the root of it comes.
And that's what defines his people in the end time. It's not anymore about Gentiles or Israel. This is what Ben Gvir stated at the time that we were there with the beginning of the 2,300
Actually, a little bit later, but
day count. Yeah. The policy to allow free worship for Jews everywhere includes the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is sovereign territory in the capital of the state of Israel. There is no law permitting discrimination against Jews on Temple Mount or anywhere else in Israel. And that is the path that Minister Ben-Gvir is charting for the police. And that is the path that is open now, that began when the vision of Daniel began with prayer on Temple Mount on December the 26th, 2024. This is 5 months later, May the 26th, 2025. And it is Jerusalem Day. And they have you can see Ben-Gvir in the flag march to Temple Mount. And then here is Ben-Gvir again praying on Temple Mount on Jerusalem Day. And this time, according to a post by the Temple Institute, 2,290 Jews are joining him, ascending the Temple Mount and praying in 2025. So to me, we could have never figured out how the prophecies all cross with Daniel's numbers without the Lord giving the numbers and blessing us to be able to see what was going on. And we could have never even figured out how the vision began if we hadn't known the numbers and been looking
for what took place,
for how God's majesty would move.
Well, if you think about what this has opened, I mean, so much is happening so quickly, and yet it seems so almost background for most people. But the truth of it,
I think even Jesus would have been that way.
Sure. Most people weren't noticing.
He was there.
Yeah, most people weren't noticing.
No big deal. Some crazy Jew.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, sometimes Itmar Ben-Gvir is referred to as a radical Jew.
Well, I'm not picking any sides of whether he's good or bad.
I'm saying that the reason he's referred to as radical is because he had the desire to do this.
He wanted freedom for the Jews on Temple Mount.
Young man, and he tried to pray openly on the temple in his younger days, and actually that's probably what launched him to his claim as fame. Is he was much like a Gandhi. He was doing civil disobedience,
right?
Or and then taking the consequences.
So back to the house of prayer, and this, of course, is the prelude to the offerings being acceptable, and prophecy is happening before our eyes. Do you remember what he prayed for?
The release of the hostages
and victory in the war. This is headline news yesterday for us as we record today. President Trump is welcomed at the Knesset in Israel to personally sign a 20-point ceasefire deal that includes the release of all 20 living of the remaining Israeli hostages. This was Monday. It is Hoshana Rabbah, the 7th day of Sukkot. Hoshana Rabbah, guys. That's the Hosanna shout. They circled the altar on the 7th day of the Feast of Tabernacles and did the Hosanna shout. It is the 7th day of Sukkot. Tomorrow is Shemini Atzeret, 2 years to the day on a Hebrew calendar, when approximately 250 hostages were abducted and approximately 1,200 people, mostly civilians, were killed in the Hamas-led attacks. I want you to see this meeting at the Knesset. You can see there's President Trump,
Benjamin
Netanyahu, and Ben-Gvir. One more thing on this one is what they're actually saying at this meeting. President Trump hailed the ceasefire deal that he helped broker. He said, "We gathered on a day of profound joy, of soaring hope," he said. "Today the skies are calm and the guns are silent," he added, which is really good because we're going to Israel in a month or two.
Month and a half.
Glad about this. The sun rises on a holy land
that close. A month and a half.
The sun rises on a holy land that is finally at peace, Trump said, expressing hope that peace would last for eternity. Now remember his prayer. The hostages would be released and victory. Trump said, "Israel, with our help, has won all that they can by force of arms." You've won. You've won. Now it's time to translate these victories against terrorists on the battlefield into the ultimate prize of peace and prosperity for the entire Middle East, he said. And then Benjamin Netanyahu spoke and praised the U.S. leader for achieving the current hostage deal and ceasefire and said, quote, "Today the Jewish calendar marks the end of 2 years of war."
And that's really fascinating that it started and ended
the 8th day of Tabernacles
on a appointed time.
Yeah. because Daniel said, at the appointed time, the end shall be. That was actually one of the clues that we knew to count the numbers that Gabriel was giving to Daniel between appointed times. And it only fits once on the calendar. All right, that was our crossover point with Daniel's numbers when we got them all to fit on the calendar, all at the same time and exactly the same numbers that Gabriel gave to Daniel. It crossed over at a point that we call Adam-Ondi-Ahman.
First fruits, the seventh day of unleavened bread.
So our next marker, you can see that we're walking with Ben Gavir here to 2027, when the next marker of Daniel's numbers, the 1290 countdown, begins. And that verse, just in case you want to know, because we kind of learned our lesson. We don't dare tell you what's going to happen, but I would give you the verse, what it says. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation set up, we kind of saw that in Daniel, that would be when Michael stands, when he sits on the temple and declares himself God, right? There will be 1290 days. So that's that 1290-day countdown.
Did you clarify from the time that it could also, or is, to the time?
Right. We kind of had a little bit of an argument over that preposition, and Farrell says, no, you can count from this way, and I said, no, you can't count backwards with from. And
well, it's actually, you could say to.
Yes, so we checked the Hebrew, and it's either or used in the context. So it
could absolutely be to.
Yes, and we had that verified by some of our
Well, I actually verified it through Blue Letter Bible to begin with, but you wanted outside confirmation.
And so I don't want to put him on the spot, so I won't tell you who, but that he did confirm. He's an expert, and he confirmed that was correct. All right, we're moving on to D&C 118. And if you don't think that God actually sets up numbers, check this out. This is the incredible revelation that sends the 12 apostles on the mission to England that will actually change the world for the church and church history at this time, with all the converts that they will make. And the Lord has definitely prepared the field. It is all ready to harvest, and the 12 are going to thrust in their sickles and cross the ocean and begin the mission over in Great Britain. I love the effectual door that will be open for them. I mean, what he's saying is that he has prepared the way for them, and there is an effectual, it's not a literal, but it's as if it was literal. It's an effectual door has been opened for you to go and preach. And I think one of the ways that door was opened was their willingness to risk their lives
to fulfill the prophecy
and take leave of the city of Far West on the 26th day of next.
Or in other words,
at the
they stayed till they could do it and then went.
Yeah. And so here we have the commandment in verse 6 to call John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, Willard Richards, big names that you know, Johnny Page, to replace some of the basically Lyman Johnson, Luke Johnson, William McClellan, different ones that have left their belief in Joseph Smith or in the gospel at this time. And John and both Johns will be ordained as they come close to the saints right before they get kicked down in Missouri in December of 1838. And Willard Richards is in England, and so he's going to get ordained when they get to England. But Wilford Woodruff is going to be the one that absolutely fulfills this prophecy, and they will ordain him just after midnight in Far West as the brothers roll another stone to the southeast corner, and they leave on one of the greatest missions in church history. And I wish I had time to say more about that, but there are a lot of resources out there you can track down about the saints and that came from the British Isles. All right, D&C 117 is, calling to William Marks, Newell K. Whitney, and Oliver Granger. They're back in Kirtland, and two of them are told to come to Missouri. So we're going to see that. I should wait to the next slide. Before I tell you what all three of them are going to be told to do, let's take a look at what the center of the chiasm is here on this slide in D&C 117. He tells them, what is property unto me, saith the Lord. This is where we started. Let the properties of Kirtland be turned out for debts, says the Lord. Let them go.
Yeah, that's just just let your businesses go, let whatever, and come answer the call.
And whatsoever remaineth, let it remain in your hands, saith the Lord. For have I not made the earth? Do I not hold the destinies of all the armies of the nations of the earth? Is there not room enough on the mountains of Adam-Ondi-Ahman that you should covet what is but the drop and neglect the more weighty matters? Guys, just bring that one home to your heart today. We have William Marks being called to come to Far West and preside. Newell K. Whitney called to Adam-Ondi-Ahman to be the bishop. By the time they get out there, they're in the middle of being expelled. And so they are not going to be able to fill those callings in Missouri, but they will take up those positions in Nauvoo when Nauvoo is established after the expulsion from Missouri. And then Oliver Granger, on the other hand, is commanded in this revelation that he's not to go to Missouri. He is commanded to go later, but he will end up dying, and he's buried next to the Kirtland Temple in Missouri. But Joseph Smith leaves him to settle all the debts and all the business accounts. They had to leave in a hurry. Brigham Young, Joseph Smith.
So somebody had to tend to the.
He had to leave somebody down to
tend to the details of
close the finances,
liquidating.
Because there were people that were accusing Joseph Smith of having left Kirtland to run away from his debts, and he did not. He sent Oliver Granger. Well, the Lord sent Oliver Granger back to
administrate it out.
Those debt deals. And I love the blessing. He says, he tells him in verse 13, let him contend earnestly for the redemption of the first presidency of my church, defend them, and for his sacrifice shall be more sacred unto me than his increase. And he tells him, the blessings of my people will be on him forever and ever. So, of course, his daughter, Sarah Granger, is going to be one of the founders of Relief Society when it's organized in Nauvoo. But she's a Sarah Granger Kimball. His daughter is going to be married to Heber. And Oliver Granger is a little bit of a forgotten hero in church history. So as we move on to DNC 119, they are asking what to do about the debts and how, the law of consecration has not been as successful as it could have been if everyone's heart had been in it, if everyone had understood more fully what it meant. I will talk a little bit, or actually I'll ask you a few questions about what it means to you at the end of these last two sections on tithing, when the law of tithing is established. But again, I want you to look at the center of the chiasm. It says that you are to pay 1/10 of all your interest annually, and there's been discussion in church history over the years of what interest is. It's kind of developed in its interpretation over the years. But what I want you to see is that you are to pay your tithing after what? After that, you pay your tithing. After your what?
After you've consecrated.
After you've consecrated all of your surplus property for the building of the kingdom and the assistance of the poor. So this isn't really a replacement for the law of consecration. It is just clarification on how we can all pull together, despite what would I call it, the unclear lines in exactly what a consecration looks like from person to person, right? But I want to argue, and number one, I want to argue in verse 6, it says that if you do not have this spirit of consecration, if you do not have your surplus property and everything that you can give to the building of the kingdom and to the poor, then it will not be a land of Zion for you. You will not have an inheritance there. And in section 120, it's talking about who the leadership is that is responsible for deciding how to spend the tithing funds. That too has developed over time. But what I want to end with is just a little bit of self-questioning here.
Analysis.
Have we consecrated to the Lord everything that we can? And I got 4 quotes here, and what I want you to do is pick your favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're going to end with this, and I want you that are listening to see which one hits home to you as well. All right, this is Amy Carmichael, famous, incredible missionary to India. She said, you can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving.
Pretty powerful.
Corrie ten Boom, she's one of my personal heroes. God measures our giving by the portion we keep. That one's like, zing! Oh, time to give so much away to DI. I'm getting old. I don't need all everything I needed to raise 12 kids, you know. The next one is the act of giving is an outward expression of an inward faith that says, I trust you, Lord, with all I have. That trust. God asks us every day in 1,000 ways.
Do you trust me?
Do you trust me?
And, I think most of the time it's progressive. We're learning to trust him most of the time.
Yeah.
It's not a given, Maybe for some it is, but.
And this last one's a proverb that I heard when I was growing up. It is not what you do with 1,000,000 if riches should ever be your lot, but what you're doing at present with the dollar and the quarter you've got.
That's beautiful.
So
those are all pretty good.
Pick your favorite.
Which ones? You can pick yours. I'm like all of the above.
And with that, guys, blessings to you, and may we meet together. At Adam-Ondi-Ahman.
I was going to say we could use the battle cry the Jews do. Next year in Jerusalem, well, we got that. Next year at Adam-Ondi-Ahman, the New Jerusalem,
Yeah.
And with that, God bless. It's been wonderful.